Hello class and happy day to you. Instructor Pamela here, and thank you for joining me today. Let's now discuss the Neoplasm table in the ICD-10 codebook. So let's say you start coding for an oncology practice and you are working with neoplasms for our diagnoses. So the first thing you want to do, start at our alphabetical index. Remember that you're always and will always be your first place when you are in your ICD-10 book is to go directly to the alphabetical index and search for the diagnoses, the disease, disorder, or the sign and symptom. In this scenario, we're going to go to our ends for neoplasm. So when you get to ends in neoplasm, as you see on top of the page, it says see neoplasm table. Okay, this is an important instruction that you always need to follow. When you see C also or C, you actually follow the instructions. Okay, so again, the name of the game with this book is not to memorize anything, it is to follow the directions provided to you. All right, so let's now go ahead and find the neoplasm table. Remember, the neoplasm table is going to be located directly after the alphabetical index. And in my book, it starts on page 467. And here is the table of neoplasms. Remember, you are going to have your guideline information in the front of your neoplasm information right here, not guidelines, but some instructions to follow from here. And so the first thing it explains to you is the different types of malignant neoplasms that we have. So as you see, we have primary malignancy, we have malignancy secondary, we have cancer in situ, benign, uncertain behavior, and unspecified behavior. So what does it all mean in English? So primary malignancy, that means it is the first site that the cancer developed in the patient, okay? And secondary malignancy would be when the first site malignancy metastasized to the second or third places, okay? Cancer in situ is basically one single cell that is infected by the malignancy, okay? Not an entire organ, just an actual cell. And benign means that it is not cancerous or malignant, so obviously that is great news. Uncertain behavior, that means when the tumor is identifiable, it'll be uncertain behavior. They can't tell if it's benign or if it's actually malignant. And unspecified behavior is kind of the same thing as uncertain behavior. It's unspecified, they're unsure of what it is. So of course, further testing would need to be done to determine if the patient actually has malignancy or not. Okay, so the neoplasm table is pretty fun to use. I like to use it myself. It is alphabetical order, just like your alphabetical index. And basically, let's just go ahead and pick a diagnosis. Let's do malignancy of the skin. And let's do basal cell carcinoma. And it's going to be malignancy primary. So what you do, I went down to skin right here, and I went down to basal cell carcinoma, and my first category, which is the malignant primary, it gives me the ICD-10 code of C44.510. Now, you know that you don't have any additional characters to add to it because it has 6 characters, and also there's no red bullet behind the last character to tell you need more additional characters. If you just take a moment to glance at the bottom of your page, you will find conventions here, and the red dot says use additional characters. And so when you just kind of scan the page, you'll see that the dot is after, for example, under medulla C74.1, there's a dash and a bullet. That means you need additional characters, okay? So this is when you're going to travel to your tabular list to get those additional characters. But in this case, for the skin basal cell carcinoma, there is no other additional characters that we have to add, so your C44.510 would be your final diagnoses. But according to the coding guidelines, you always should travel to your tabular list to verify this code. So let's go ahead and do so. We are going to C44.510. So this is a good opportunity to use your placeholders, your rulers, your pens, pieces of paper, or you can just obviously jot down the code, or if you can actually memorize it, unlike myself, you can go ahead and do that. So we're looking for C44.510. All right, when we get there, C44.51, as you see, it has the red stop sign to the left of it, basal cell carcinoma, indicating that you need an additional character, and there is our code, the V44.510 basal cell carcinoma of anal skin. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that we were in anal skin in the neoplasm table. So keep in mind, depending on what facilities or areas that you work in will determine, of course, the emitting diagnoses for the patient. For example, let's say the patient came for a biopsy and it was determined that the patient has skin cell carcinoma of the anal skin. And so that would be the primary diagnosis. And of course, the biopsy procedure would be the service that is supporting the biopsy. And then obviously they determined that it is malignant. Now, let's say the patient is going for follow-up care and they are going through their chemotherapy services. So when the patient arrives for services for the chemotherapy, when the case is coded, it's not going to be that primary basal cell carcinoma of the anal skin. Rather, it's going to be an admission code for them receiving their chemotherapy, and it's going to be covered with a Z code. And this information, of course, is all in your guidelines section in the front of the book and then, of course, in front of the tabular list. But again, when we are having encounters or admissions for services such as chemotherapy, the ICD-10 primary diagnosis is always going to be the Z code for encounter for chemotherapy. And then we would list, in addition to the primary diagnosis, the secondary diagnosis would be, obviously, the malignancy, which is basal cell carcinoma of the anal skin. So that's how you would code an example for chemotherapy opposed to a patient that was just diagnosed with the malignancy with a biopsy. Now let's say the patient goes to the emergency room for dehydration and on-site anemia from the chemotherapy treatment. So when the patient arrives to the emergency room and the treatment is begun, when we code the case, this time we're going to put actual dehydration and anemia due to neoplastic administration of drugs. Okay, and then whatever emergency E&M code that we'll go ahead and use for the services. So keep in mind, depending on where you're working at or what case you're coding for, is going to determine how your malignancies or how your neoplasm table or your Chapter 2 tabular section is going to be coded. Okay, I just gave you 3 different scenarios of how malignancies are coded, and it's always going to be different, so always keep that in mind. Again, you want to make sure that you are tabbing your Chapter 2 and your tabular list, which is for neoplasms, and also make sure that you are following through your guidelines. Go to your Chapter 2 and the guidelines in the front of the book, and then put a little tab there, and then write neoplasms. So again, you're just giving you more areas to reference for your guidelines. Remember, your guidelines are in front of your book from pages 1 through 50, and then there is respective guidelines for each chapter in the tabular list. So neoplasms is Chapter 2, so you'll find the set of guidelines in Chapter 2. And so while we're there, let's go ahead and check that out. So again, you're able to highlight and write in your book, write as many notes as you want to, as well as the guidelines section, because during your national certifications, you are going to be referencing your guidelines for mostly everything. I can promise you that, especially for the CPC certification. All right, so here's your guidelines for neoplasm, Chapter 2. It is long, so you want to get familiar with the guidelines in the neoplasm. All right, so thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you on the next video. Please make sure that you look out for our discussion forum questions relating to Chapter 2 neoplasms and the neoplasm table. Thank you, bye-bye.